Welcome back to our show, your show, Let's Talk Stocks. In studio with us this morning is Ms. Sanya Goffe, and she's president of the Pension Association of Jamaica. Of course, we know how important pension is to retirement. So let's talk retirement planning this morning with Sanya. Sanya, welcome to the show.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely great to have you. Pension. Whole matter of retirement planning seems to be a big issue now on the front burner. Very concerning to Jamaicans, as we hear not a lot of Jamaicans have a pension plan.
That's correct, and it's quite unfortunate. So we have about maybe in the private sector 9 to 11% pension coverage. It's been hovering between 9 to 11% for the last 30, 40 years. And when you consider public sector workers and those who are in the tourism workers pension scheme, kind of bumps up to about 18%. So pension coverage is very low in Jamaica, and that really is presenting a real, retirement security crisis for us as a nation.
But that's a major challenge all around, Sonia, because yes, on the one hand, everybody should have a nest egg when it comes to retirement. So if they don't, then who takes care of these people?
So at the end of the day, it becomes a burden on the government and then basically taxpayers, so it becomes a fiscal burden, and taxpayers are going to have to look after the elderly. And so that's why, having that retirement security and being able to live a dignified life in retirement is so important. And planning early for retirement becomes very critical at that point.
On the other side of that coin, in a financial sector that is as developing as rapidly as ours, pension funds play a big role, and the more we have in pension funds, it's absolutely better for the economy in terms of funds available for investments and growing the economy and companies and so on.
Correct. So pension funds today represent the largest pool of investable resources in Jamaica. And so a number of our big capital markets raises, our IPOs, are funded by pension funds. The problem that we have, though, is that the regulations that determine what pension funds can invest in and how much they can invest in are quite restrictive. And so we have heavy qualitative as well as quantitative limits around pension fund investments, as well as concentration limits in terms of connected parties and how much in a particular entity you can invest. And that really hamstrings the diversity for our pension funds. And at the end of the day, beneficiaries are the ones that suffer when the restrictions are too tight. And so a big part of what the Pension Industry Association of Jamaica advocates for is the loosening and the liberalizing of some of those restrictions. So we were a big part of the lobby of moving the foreign investment restrictions from what was 5%, what was actually 0, but to 5%, to 7.5%, to now 10%. But it still is very low, and so we're hoping that over time we will see a greater easing and liberalizing of the investment regulations.
More to the other side of pension for the investor, for the person themselves, the worker themselves. How early should one start their retirement planning, their pension fund investing?
That's a good question. Most of us think it's when we start to think about retirement, but it actually is when you start to work. The first day on the job, you should be inquiring with your employer about the pension arrangement. Now, if your employer already has a pension plan in place, the law requires you to be automatically enrolled once you complete any probationary period. It's where your employer, and so you don't have to think about it. You save alongside your paycheck, and there's no real work on your part. You're just automatically enrolled. Where the kind of hard work and initiative comes is when your employer does not have a pension plan, because Jamaica, we don't have any obligation or statutory requirement for employers to put in place pension arrangements. So it's really at the discretion of the employer. And so where your employer does not have a pension plan, you now have to take that initiative to enroll in any of the individual retirement schemes that we have in Jamaica, approved retirement schemes.
So what I hear you saying is that there are at least two different pension options. One in the case where the employer has a plan,
right,
and one where they don't. Talk to us about
Correct.
that.
So when your employer has a pension plan, it's referred to as a superannuation fund. And as I said, the law requires that as a part of that, you are obligated to participate when you join the workforce. But there could be situations where your employer doesn't have a pension plan, or you are not eligible to participate in the pension plan. It may be a pension plan for a certain type of worker in the workforce, and you may not be eligible. There may be age restrictions why you're not able to participate. So if you are not eligible to participate in your employer pension plan, or your employer does not have one, you would then have the option to participate in an approved retirement scheme. And you get the same tax benefits, and you have the same allowance of 20% of your earnings to contribute.
So this 20% of your earnings, because in most pension plans, what the number we hear about is a 5%.
Right.
How does that relate?
Okay, that's an excellent question. So typically in an employer pension plan, in your standard defined contribution plan where your employer contributes and you contribute, the general standard customary common contribution rate is 5%.
Yes.
You would contribute 5%, your employer contributes 5%. But that's not the cap. What the law says is that the Income Tax Act says that your employer can contribute up to 10%. You can contribute up to 10, but where your employer contributes less than 10%, you can contribute an additional amount, such that the aggregate of the contributions is 20%. So if your employer contributes 3%, you can contribute 17, up to a total of 20. Right. So you can go beyond the 10% where your employer contributes less. If your employer is already at 10%, you can't go beyond 10.
Okay.
Right.
And in the individual retirement scheme now, approved retirement scheme, you can do the full
20%. And in some cases with the individual retirement scheme, your employer is also contributing to the retirement scheme on your behalf. And if the employers contribute 3, 5, 10, it's the same thing, up to an aggregate of 20. An important thing to remember is that these contributions are before your income is taxed. And so you get this tax advantage savings vehicle through pension arrangements. So you contribute before your income is taxed. All the earnings and accretions on those investments of your pension contributions are not taxed as well. And then what happens is that your pension is taxed when you reach retirement. So it's not a tax-free, it's more a tax-deferred system that we have. But that tax advantage works in your favor because, of course, you're able to accrue more than if you were to...
More money is up front and more money is compounding.
Exactly. Versus if you were to be saving after your income is taxed.
All right. So that's interesting. So you're saying because the pension comes out before any tax is applied to your income, you're saying it helps in that you have more to put away.
Exactly. You get a better opportunity to save more of your income because it's on your gross earnings versus
but that would
your
also
net
mean you
earnings.
pay less taxes.
Yes, exactly. And remember as well, we have a threshold. So there's a threshold already that's tax-free. And then above that is what you then would get the benefit on it.
All right. So for the individual, and I just want to ensure that the viewers understand this clearly, you can contribute or have contributed on your behalf up to 20% of your income.
Yes.
And not just the 5%.
Right,
So,
correct.
And you would encourage people to do the full
Of course,
contribution.
of course. If you're able to contribute up to the maximum allowed on the law. That really is always the best practice.
Yes.
And one of the things I want to talk about a little later is how we really look at encouraging people to take that initiative to participate in retirement schemes and the work that the PIAJ is doing in relation to its auto-enrollment proposal and changing that choice architecture. Because the reality is that it's been, since independence really, we've had this low pension coverage. And, programs like these, financial literacy initiatives are great. But the reality is that it has not proven to be sufficient to move the needle in terms of coverage. And so one of the things we're looking at the PIAJ is advancing what we are calling an auto-enrollment proposal, which is where your employer does not have a pension plan. And therefore you would have to then show the initiative of going and knocking on the door of an NCB or Scotia VM to enroll in a retirement scheme, the employer would be mandated by law to put you into a retirement scheme. So rather than you having to take that first step, where the PIAJ is advocating that the employer ought to be statutorily mandated to put you in a retirement scheme if it does not have a pension arrangement of its own.
And the PIAJ, just for the viewers, is the Pension
Industry Association of Jamaica. Yes.
Of course, of which you are the president.
Right.
So the president is speaking, and of course she's telling us all about pension and why we should ensure that we have a pension arrangement. And not just that, but how early from your very first paycheck. And this is not just something when you get old and worried, right. Oh, I'm going into retirement. This is an interesting discussion. We can't have it in 15 minutes, viewers. Absolutely intriguing discussion on a very important topic. We're going to wrap up here today, and we want to thank her for coming and talking to us, at least touching on some of the major issues regarding pension. As we always say here on Let's Talk Stocks, we give you information to make better financial decisions. Come back with us next week when we'll have the second part of our interview with Sanya Goffe, President of the Pension Industry Association of Jamaica. And here she'll explain why pension contributions should be compulsory. Have a great day.